And this is Steve Onsman from Calvary United Church of Christ in Reading, Pennsylvania. This is the Wednesday Word for May 12th, 2021. Um, Today's question is anonymous. I really need more questions. I'm running out. In fact, I think I've run out. So if you've got a question, you can send it to me through Facebook or my last name at comcast.net, onsman at comcast.net, and I will try my best to answer your question. Here it is. Here it is. Where does the phrase, there but for the grace of God go I? Where does it come from? What does it mean? All right, well, originally I had read that it was attributed to St. Augustine. It's not from the Bible. And it not only is it a really mean thing to say, it's also bad theology. So while Augustine gets some attribution, the earliest we can prove, the most evidence points to a man named John Bradford. He was an English pastor who died in 1555. The quote legend says is that Bradford, who would eventually be martyred during the terrible reign of Mary, saw another pastor being taken to the gallows and replied, "Take away the grace of God, and there goes John Bradford." The phrase seems to be innocuous, but I think it's really kind of damaging. Think about what it means. You see somebody who's had misfortune. Somebody dies in a crash, or a child dies, or something terrible. And you say that phrase. What are you really saying? What you're saying is that the terrible thing happened to that person and not to you because you have God's grace and they don't. You don't mean it, but that's what the phrase says. Also, even maybe in some ways is just as bad, is that this is at the root of prosperity thinking. And I'm not going to call it gospel because it's prosperity, the prosperity nonsense out there that passes for Christianity, Joel Osteen, that sort of thing, is not Christianity. It is greed, and it's bad theology. Again, the idea that God blesses those God likes with good stuff, and God doesn't bless those God doesn't like with bad stuff. So, I mean, I can see how we get this from the Bible, right? But honestly, think about the story of Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus gets to go to heaven. He's lived his life in poverty, I guess. The rich man, who doesn't even get a name, languishes in hell. Why? Because the rich man didn't have a chance to accept God's grace. I mean, he didn't live it out. And so he used his privilege only for himself and allowed the suffering of Lazarus to continue. In fact, Jesus speaks to this affliction of the rich regularly, to greed. I mean, greed is idolatry. It's defined by Paul as idolatry constantly. It's not impossible for rich people to get into heaven from Jesus' point of view, but it's really hard. It's like shoving a camel through the eye of a needle. That's the phrase he uses. Now, there's some question about whether it's camel or something else, but still, it could maybe he meant rope. There's similarity in the words in the original languages, I'm told. But in fact, Jesus preaches an anti-prosperity gospel, one that recognizes, he says, the poor you'll have with you always. That's not because he thinks it's a good thing. It's because he recognizes what human beings are like. It's not because people who are poor deserve it. I mean, there are people who just won't work or fall into drug addiction and their lives are really a huge struggle. But it's not that people deserve poverty. It's that we allow it. Now, the phrase, there but for the grace of God go I, became very popular and was attributed over the years to others like Richard Baxter and John Bunyan in the 1600s, to John Wesley in the 1700s, the great evangelist George Whitefield in 1845, then to John Newton in 1848. Maybe you know these names, maybe not. Then it was actually used in a book, a Sherlock Holmes book in 1891, and then 1903 to Philip Neri, and then Dwight Moody, he of the Moody Institute, in 1937. So still, the question of grace is, Augustine wrote at length about grace in Confessions, and he lived, in the late 300s, early 400s. And the theme was then picked up again by reformers 1,100 years later. Who God gives grace to has always been the question, and to most people, the answer has been everyone, at least everyone who agrees with them, which is again another perversion of the faith, just like prosperity religion. The idea of grace is that it is that which you receive that you don't deserve and you haven't earned. Right? It's not a payment. It's not exclusive. It's offered to anybody um, who breathes, and then we have to receive it. That's my sermon from last Sunday. If you want to check out our service on YouTube. So please don't say there, but for the grace of God go I. Don't ever say that unless you really mean that people who are struggling and suffering and having difficult times have been ignored by God, not loved by God, refused God's grace. And knowing most of you who might be watching this, I don't think you think that. Anyway, that's all I have for today. What do you think? You can comment, send me an email. Give me more questions. I really need questions because I've run out. And again, even get your vaccination, please. Get your vaccination. We're hoping to open church on the 20th of June for 8 and 9:30 worship, but you have to be vaccinated. We're asking you to please do that. It's simple. It's free. So just go and do that. And still be respectful, wear your mask, wash your hands, and take care of yourselves. And I'll see you next week.